So welcome everyone today to this session, using deliberative dialogues to break down barriers and bridge community divides for the ICMA Annual Conference. My name is Joshua V. Barr, and I am the Chief Strategist and founder of Raising the Bar, LLC. Prior to that, I am the former director of the Des Moines Civil and Human Rights Commission. I left the commission in July of 2021, and working with me on this presentation and presenting alongside me is my colleague and friend Cameron Middlebrooks. He is the outgoing chair of the Des Moines Civil and Human Rights Commission, where he served from 2016 to 2021, and he is presently the director of community impact for the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines, and he's also the former Midwest Regional Director of the National Association of Colored Persons, also known as the NAACP. So today we're going to talk about deliberative dialogues, and we're going to start with an introduction to the City of Des Moines, which will be our case study. Then we'll talk about what deliberative dialogues are, deciding on a topic, crafting a discussion packet, outreach methods and community buy-in, and leading a discussion. And we'll be concluding with crafting and implementing policy ideas. So I will pass it off to my colleague, Cameron Middlebrooks.
Thank you, Joshua. It's a pleasure to be here for this presentation for you all today. And I get to talk to you a little bit about the City of Des Moines, the city that myself and Joshua call home. It's a city that I have been rooted in since a young child. The reason why we're using the City of Des Moines as a case study today is because this is a community that we initiated the Bridging the Gap initiative, which you'll hear more about later, which is really the best way that we utilize the deliberative dialogues. As a City of Des Moines, you know, we call it a tale of two cities. And the reasons are, we'll go into the next slide, because at one side of the spectrum, you see the community as a community on the rise. It's a city on the rise. You notice that, you know, we're the #1 city for young adults, #2 city for business and careers. And if you looked at the Des Moines Partnerships website, which is our regional chamber of commerce, it tells a great story about this city. However, I mentioned that it is a city or a tale of two cities because there is the other side of this community. The other side of this is, as you can see, that we can gloat about a lot of the things that are going well, but there is equally damning stories to tell. Here you will see statistics that do not shine the brightest light on our community. I'd like to highlight a few of them. #1 being the #9 worst city for African Americans. You'll see in 2017, we had the most homicides since the 1970s. In addition to that, one that's not listed also in that year, by March of that year, we already had 100 reports of shots fired. So while we came into this deliberative dialogue process, it came in at a time that our city was experiencing tremendous struggles and challenges with safety and justice in our community. In 2017, I'd also like to outline that the Directors Council, which Joshua is a founding member and board member of, released a report outlining the disparities of African and African Americans in Polk County, many of which are highlighted in the statistics that you see, among others that are not. But our city has a very diverse future. It actually has a diverse present. We are already have a numerical minority within inside of our school districts. However, over 60% of those individuals, students, already qualify for free or reduced free lunch, which is a sign of poverty. And we understood that we must address these issues early so children are not languishing in poverty into adulthood. Another issue that we have in our community comes with affordable housing. On the left side of this chart, you will see income of individuals in central Iowa. On the right, you will see the number of available units per income level. What you'll notice is that half the number of available units for extremely low income. You also notice that there's 30,000 available units for very low income, but a smaller number of units available for not low income. The issue at hand that we see is those who can afford to pay more are taking up the units designed to be available for those with less income. So there's a huge disparity, and a lot of times this disparity affects those from the minority populations. So this is what got us into what we call bridging the gap. Because of these issues in the community, we decided to implement a community engagement program titled Bridging the Gap to improve communications and relationships between community and local government decision makers and create equitable policies that move our community forward. We wanted to do this in a way that pulled people in and not called people out. The thought process behind this was no matter your background or station in life, as a member of the Des Moines community, we are all neighbors first, and the issues we face are common problems. And we needed to come together to offer solutions for a more equitable city.
Thank you, Cameron. And to create that more equitable city, one of the ideas we had was to do deliberative dialogues. Now, if you look at our community and around the country, there's just so much bickering and back and forth. And I personally feel that in many communities, we're at a breaking point, especially in light of the pandemic and George Floyd. And it's really not, and we really can't seem to come together on a number of issues. And we're more so focused on what your political ideology is, how much money you make, and color of skin. And so we would do town halls, and it would be just like that, where it was people coming in with swords, that would be members of the community, and members of government coming in with shields. And many research has now shown that a lot of lawmakers are actually ditching town halls because we're not actually resolving anything. So one of the solutions that we offered to actually get to address the issues at hand and bring community together rather than coming in to rumble, as this slide kind of demonstrates, was to have deliberative dialogue. And deliberative dialogue is about giving community a voice. And it's a process that allows people to engage in public talk. It is an exercise in working cooperatively to examine social problems in a way that allows people to share their views, their experiences, and uncover their values. It should not be confused with debate, which a lot of times a town hall can seem like. It does not seek to do closure, but rather to discover new options. And those new options really come through discussion and having dialogue amongst each other. This slide explains a little more what I mean by that. So debate is usually to evaluate the quality of the argument through a clashing of ideas and expertise. And that's a lot of times what you find in town halls or community town halls, where people just come out and complain and yell at one another and always pointing out what others aren't doing. But dialogue is to foster understanding and respect through listening, storytelling, and conversation. And we work through that process through a process called deliberation, where we make tough decisions together and weigh trade-offs. Now, why is it important that we make these tough decisions together in dialogue and try to build understanding? Because each of us really walk in with our own kind of bias, the way we see the world. The way we see the world is really through how we were raised and our culture and our parents, our grandparents, et cetera. And if we just come into a debate or a town hall style where everyone is just open mic, we aren't really trying to understand, why do you see things the way you see them? And the biases that we may have within, are really trying to get that human connection through conversation. So one of the goals of dialogue and deliberation, or some of the goals, number one, you want to learn what the issues are. You want to improve democratic attitude and skills, especially at a time when people seem to be falling apart. And that way you kind of improve relationships. And as you improve those relationships, you can transform conflicts and really improve institutional decision-making through the back and forth of giving community a voice. And that leads to improved community problem solving, which leads to an increase in civic capacity. Now, some people may be like, well, I don't want people showing up to these meetings. Well, then maybe dialogue is not for you, because you have to really decide, do you want to give the appearance of making progress and moving the community forward, or do you desire to actually effectuate change in your community? And the way to do that, we believe is, and we suggest, is deliberative dialogue, where you bring everyone to the table, or as many people as possible, and try to get enough voices to make an informed decision on these issues. Because one of the things that, kind of our motto in doing this work when we were both with the commission is we believe that when there is no investment in communities, people leave. And then organizations and cities have to spend more money to attract other individuals into their city. The brain drain and that intellectual capital is leaving the city. And then when people leave, businesses leave too, and they go to where the talent pool is. And when businesses leave the city and people leave the city, you lose city revenues, which impacts neighborhoods and schools. And if neighborhoods and schools lose funding, then residents can't be educated or get jobs. And when there's no investment in the community, people leave. And it's just a vicious cycle that we are trying to prevent. And we believe one of the ways to prevent that is to really engage with the community and give them a voice and see what they need. Because again, I'm a firm believer that you can't invest in buildings and neighborhoods and not also invest in the people who live in those buildings and neighborhoods. At the end of the day, when things are in trouble, we're trying to rescue people, because at the end of the day, a community is comprised of people. And you can't fix streets while economically, socially, and financially, families are falling apart. We have to invest in the family. And one way to do that is to engage with them, include them in the process, and value them. We'll talk more about that later. So I'll pass it off to my colleague, Cameron.
Thank you, Joshua. So at some point you have to name the issue, right? And we talk a lot about, how do we decide the topic? And in 2017, the way that we decided that topic was, well, first, let's kind of paint the picture of where we were at. As I mentioned earlier, in March of 2017, we are already well on our way with having the most homicides the city's ever seen since the 1970s. At that particular time in March, police department had already reported over 100 reports of shots fired. The community called for a town hall discussion at a local church. Joshua and I were both invited, given our stations and seats in the community. But panelists also included other church leaders, community leaders, and representatives from the police department. But as we sat in that town hall for over an hour, having discussion after discussion, grenades being launched, swords being wielded, shields being put up, we never got to a solution. Zero solutions were created out of it. And Joshua and I had a conversation immediately after that panel. I think we were still on stage, and vowed to each other that we're no longer going to participate in conversations that were not solution oriented. Now, how do you figure out how to get to those solution oriented conversations? You could go do a whole bunch of surveys and ask people what the biggest issues are in the community. But we were at a time where we couldn't afford to take time to do those surveys because our community was in a moment of crisis. And as a true public servant, you should be aware of what's happening in your surroundings, and simply just read the room. You can read the room in two primary methods. Those methods are, number one, the town hall format or the city council format. Servants should always be paying attention to who's coming into the meetings and what they're complaining about. That helps give you a pulse of some of the things that need to be addressed in the way that is more effective than city council meetings can be. Actually sitting down and having dialogues about those issues can be much more effective. Additionally, you can go through the media. You can also read the room by focusing on what's happening in the news. Not everyone can make it to a city council meeting, but some people are talking to reporters and getting their stories out through print media, through social media, or through TV media. So media is another effective way of understanding the issues that people are talking about. You should be reading your daily papers and blogs about the issues that are affecting certain communities within your cities and towns. You figure out what are the big stories that are affecting the community. There are headlines from 2017 in Des Moines that you'll see here on this slide talking about Des Moines ends 2017 with the most homicides since 1978. Another one I'd like to point out, why can't Des Moines do something about all these abandoned homes? As we mentioned, we were going through huge issues with safety and justice from the violence that was going on in the community, but then also safety from a standpoint of affordable and safe housing. And utilizing what we saw in the media, what we saw from conversations we had with community members, it gave us a guidepost of where our conversations and topics should be focused. So again, community surveys, they are a tool that can be used with the advent of technology and being able to reach people virtually and across social media. Surveys are also a good option. But again, sometimes the answers, the obvious questions that are sometimes already answered, right? As you begin to build credibility and understanding the communities that you serve, you can do, there's more effective ways than surveying. An example that I'll give you is actually when we try to do Bridging the Gap 2.0 after this past summer, what we experienced, we were in the midst of the pandemic and then also pre-George Floyd. Our Civil Rights Commission, certain members of us wanted to do Bridging the Gap 2.0 because we felt like we heard the room. We were seeing the uprisings that was happening in our city council. We were seeing the uprisings that were happening on our streets. The news was reporting on it, whether it be mass media, social media, so on and so forth. But some of our committee members wanted to do a survey to understand what the issues were. It took us about 3.5 months to actually get that survey out. And then it took us an additional 2 months to analyze those survey results. The fear here is you can get stuck in analysis paralysis. If you are truly reading the room from the front end, you don't necessarily have to go back out in the community time and time again to survey them. And also another challenge with surveys is the potential to coat that survey in bias, whether that be intentional or unintentional. But it's also very key to understand that the community bias should always outweigh any personal bias you have. And the way that happens is if you are constantly reading the room in times of good and also times of crisis.
Co-sign on everything you're saying, Cameron, and remember all the stuff we kind of went through. And once you have read the room, or if you decided to do a survey and you really understand what issue you really need to focus on or what issues you need to focus on, then you have to kind of frame the issue. You do that through developing a discussion packet. Now, in the city, we actually had 2 dialogues that were kind of going on simultaneously. We were focused on safety and justice, which were some of the bigger issues that were coming up at city council meetings and in some of the news. But we also understood that there were some voices that weren't being heard. Des Moines operates as a hub city where a number of refugees and immigrants come to that city, and we, based on the data, we have more refugees and immigrants in this city than throughout the entire state of Iowa. And so we developed discussion packets ourselves, myself, Cameron, and a few of our colleagues. Were trained in kind of developing a discussion packet. So with safety and justice, originally, we actually developed our own packet. And with the refugee immigrant challenges that we saw, we developed another discussion packet. And so what you have to decide when you're building a packet is, are you going to go homegrown or you want to do something that's already made? Ultimately, with the safety and justice, we actually scrapped that one and we used one developed by the National Issues Forum. Now, one of the reasons why we did that is because when you're looking at this slide in particular, to the left of it, you're looking at, you have to frame the issue. We had framed the issue. There was an issue of safety and justice, but also opportunity gaps within our community. And then we wanted to make those decisions deliberatively, giving the community the options, knowing what the options are, what can we do to address safety and justice issues, and letting them kind of decide and talk about what the trade-offs and what the drawbacks are, and ultimately kind of picking which issues set and work with them the most. Now, when we were putting that original packet together, we actually did a test run and we saw that it worked pretty effectively. However, when we wanted to implement it, there were people who were worried about bias within our commission and bias within the department. And so we actually decided to go with the National Issues Forum packet because we felt that it kind of removed any thought of bias within our organization. So when you're putting together these discussion packets so people can actually come to the table have these discussions and really make decisions deliberatively, you have to think on the front end, are there going to be any hurdles to getting that done? And some of those hurdles we actually experienced, and actually when we did this dialogue. So some of the pros and cons of self-development, the pros are, if you're paying attention, you're reading a room, you know the issue, so you know kind of what questions to ask. You understand what options are available to your city. You know what's within the scope of your power and also your budget to get done. And you can run tests and make necessary tweaks if necessary. And we actually, as I stated before, we ran a few tests. We did a few test runs and we got to see, are we in the right direction? And the test runs gave us a very robust discussion. And we thought that we were in the right direction. But some of the cons of developing your own packet, it was very time-consuming. It took us a few months to do it. And we had to tweak it over and over again. And then, as Cameron kind of alluded to, there could be some bias creep into the crafting of the packet if you aren't checking yourself, both your explicit and implicit biases. But then that resistance from certain departments. In our case, it was the police department. The police department thought that we had an agenda, and because of that, they were hesitant to come along to something new and different that they didn't really understand and know anything about, and it came from a department that was not theirs. And so we were fortunate, in the midst of crafting our packet, our discussion on safety and justice, National Issues Forum and the Kettering Foundation actually released one while we were in the negotiations of trying to figure out if we were actually going to be able to do this, and we were going to get buy-in from the police department. And so with the Kettering Foundation and the National Issues Forum Institute, they came out with the packet. And it was actually very similar to what we were talking about. And if it would have came out earlier, it would have saved us a lot of time. It's one of the pros of actually using a pre-made packet by an organization. And saves money if your budget is limited, saves staff time. It's a neutral party. So any fear of any biases from or agendas from certain organizations or group, whoever may be trying to lead this, are kind of neutralized. And that neutrality leads to less resistance from those who may be hesitant, because again, you're doing something new, you're doing something different. Some of the cons, though, are that the issues are not specific to the challenges of your particular community. And that's very important, that when you're having these discussions, that you're able to draw and hone in on what's happening in your own community. Now, we were fortunate. National Issues Forum had actually done something new where they had these little blank areas in the discussion packet where you could input data from your city and options from your city, in addition to some of the things that they suggested, which actually was really good. So we weren't locked in, and I've seen them do that a little more moving forward on some of their discussion. But also, one of the cons is, things noted in the packet, again, may not be relevant to your community. And then, but you're less flexible due to the pre-made nature of the packet. Even if you do a test run, the test run isn't really about the content of the packet. It's really about your facilitation skills. And we didn't do a test run on the packet because we actually thought it was very similar to what we had already done and what we ran a test on. But you also need to think about, in when you're making a packet, are you going to do it in an additional language? And so if you do that, that's going to cost additional time and money. And there's no need to make it in an additional language if you aren't going to have facilitators who actually can speak that language and have that discussion. And that's something that we did with our refugee immigrant packet. Is we actually did one completely in Spanish. And we actually had persons that could speak Spanish, including myself, but who led those discussions and gave that community impact and input on where we're going as a city. Now, once you have started to make these packets and you're ready to go, then you move into the outreach methods. And I'm going to pass that off to Cameron.
Thanks, Joshua. Before I get into the outreach methods, I do want to just highlight what you were bringing about being inclusive with those packets and possibly doing those in other languages. It's very key that if you're going to be inclusive, don't be halfway inclusive. You got to go the entire way, ensuring that you have facilitators that can match the languages that you are attempting to move that packet into as well. And I think from our refugee and immigrant subcommittee, we were very strategic in doing that and ensuring that we had facilitators they could see that through just as competently as those that spoke English as well. But that really digs into our outreach methods, right, and who we had in the room. It was important for us to ensure that we were bringing in as many people to this process as possible. You can see that our dialogue format consisted of just about 16 2.5-hour small group dialogues on the topic that we decided. And we held these in various locations throughout the city in all 4 wards of our community. And we ensured that we had participation from all 7 members of our city council, as well as city directors, other influencers, and community members that would be affected by these decisions as well. Those community members included not only members of the business community, but also our youth, folks from our nonprofit sector, folks from our activist groups, and our special interest groups. And we also wanted to be strategic and ensure that we were including people who we knew had voices in the community, but never had been included in this process before. And I think that was very key to the overall buy-in of the overall majority of our community members. They felt involved in this process from the very beginning of the process. But a key component to ensuring the buy-in of our decision makers and policy makers, we understood that we needed a champion to really push this forward. And we decided to use the mayor of our city, Mayor Frank County. This was an integral part of our process because we sent letters in the name of our champion to every city, every county council member, every school board member, every city council member, also local state representatives and federal representatives and other prominent business leaders. We did this because many times we saw that these individuals had the ability to opt out of these discussions because they didn't think it was necessarily for them. But we wanted to ensure that they understood how important their voices were in this process and that their presence definitely mattered because we knew our community members needed to see them at the table in order for them to believe that true action was going to come out of this. In addition to that, being that the conversation was on safety and justice, we wanted to ensure that the police department was involved in the front end. We have seen in the past where conversations like this had occurred, but there was low involvement from the police department on the front end, which resulted in no action. By pulling in the mayor to be our champion, he was able to pull in the city manager, which was able to pull in the chief of police and his subordinates as well. And at the end of these discussions, I will admit there was hesitation from many officers to join the discussions in the first place. But by the end of it, what we heard from a lot of them was, hey, this wasn't that bad. And I truly believe the reason why that was a sentiment that we got from them and others was because these conversations were not focused on the challenges or what people were not doing, but instead focused on the solutions and what we could be doing together to ensure that our community is moving forward. Other techniques that we use for buy-in, again, on the outreach side of things was promotion. We promoted this through social media, earned media, email blasts to our listservs, got into the schools and reached out to our activist groups as well. And location is always important. We wanted to make sure we limited the barriers to success as possible. We did this by holding meetings through the day for our business community, in the evenings for folks that had to work, the folks that did work during the day. And for folks who just couldn't make it through to a meeting during the week, we also held it on the weekends. And it was also important for us, again, to limit barriers. So we wanted to make sure wherever we held it at in the city, the parking was not going to be an issue. So there were no meters. So we reduced the barrier there. We ensured that there was always food available. So members that were thinking about participating, there was no barrier of how they were going to eat lunch that day if it was a lunchtime meeting, or how they were going to feed their families at night if it was an evening meeting. Another suggestion that we did not do this time around, but other initiatives that we have done, it's very similar. We offer childcare services. So there was a limited barrier for those that had children, but still wanted to attend. At the end of the day, when you're trying to have conversations like this that involve community members, it's important that you think about the barriers and how you can limit those or completely take those out of the thought process of the participants that you want to attend.
Yeah, and Cameron, I completely agree. I think when you're promoting this event, you have to understand not everybody has the television or utilizing cable, et cetera. And so social media was a key aspect or key part of what we were doing, where we had paid promotions on Facebook, where people could sign up to attend whatever day worked best for them. And so we had paid promotions. We posted it constantly throughout a few months. I believe it was about 2 months that we promoted this event on our Instagram and our Twitter. But we also talked with other nonprofits and what we were trying to do, and they helped promote it. We did news interviews talking about why it's important, including the mayor. We keep an email list for everybody. And so we just constantly send out emails reminding people to sign up. And then once they signed up, reminding them, hey, this is the day you signed up. Just kind of sending in that reminder. People get busy. Even when we're talking about schools, with the schools, we actually met with, we wanted to make sure youth had a voice. And we met with the principals of high schools. And we said, we want youth to have a voice in this process. And what they did was they ensured that we had youth at every single discussion. Even if that was during the school day, they gave the children credit. We had like 1 or 2 youth at every event. And they were giving credit for coming to this event and being civically engaged. And Cameron talked about it earlier, but some of these activist groups want to be heard. And they have, their own agenda and their own issues that they wanted to work on. And so we had to meet with them and talk with them about why it's important that you be at the table for this. This is something that the city is open to, and they're willing to listen to everyone, including you. So you probably want to be there. Just on food, food always brings people to the table. I mean, we did another project called Breaking Bread, Building Bridges, where the whole thing was about people engaging one another over food that we won an Emmy for. But I think food is always one of those things that can breaks hesitancy. I know, and Cameron and I were joking when we were putting this presentation together. We were talking about how we had to choose between 2 meetings, and one had food and the other one didn't. And we would actually go for the one that had food. And food is always a big draw when you know that, okay, I'm not getting paid to do this, but at least they're going to feed me. And we always make sure that we had food that was number one, it was delicious. We use a lot of local vendors. We try to really promote that. But number 2 was also it was also culturally sensitive. We didn't try to make sure we didn't have hot dogs and things like that, where someone may not eat pork, et cetera. And then we had a few vegans or vegetarians. We would always make sure we had an option there, et cetera. So those are just some things to really break down those barriers that Cameron talked about in regards to wanting to attend and be a part of such a big event and a big project that really required input from the community. So, leading a dialogue discussion. Now, there are a number of things to consider. First of all, as Cameron talked about, we had to really decide on group size. Now, the bad thing about a town hall is it's open mic, as many people can come as possible. And sometimes you'll get hundreds of people who are grabbing a mic and yelling, or sometimes you get 2 people and nobody shows up. And that's always kind of depending on what the hot topic is in local government. Now, one of the things that we strategically did is we had a number of discussions around the city, and we wanted to make sure that we always had decision makers and influencers at every event. And decision makers are the people who make the decision, department directors, legislators, CEOs of businesses, but also those influencers, such as, we would consider the chief of police a decision maker, but the influencers would be beat cops and people, working at the front desk. And so we wanted to make sure those influencers were there too. It wasn't just a top heavy input. It was actually input from people that worked in various city departments, worked at different nonprofits who actually influence decisions that are made in some of these quasi-government organizations like the Metropolitan Transportation Organization, who influence the decisions that decision makers make regarding where we're going to put money into neighborhoods and streets and transportation and infrastructure. So we made sure that we had those persons at every event. We made sure we had youth at every event. We made sure we had certain business leaders at every event. And then we left about, I believe, probably about 6 seats open just for everyday persons that wanted to attend the event, and we sent it out 2 persons. Now, group size, we really didn't want to do more than 30 because we wanted robust participation. We told people you're going to be there for 2.5 hours. And again, we have food, so don't worry about going hungry. But if you have a group that is too big, it's hard for everyone to get a voice or get an opportunity to speak. And also, if the group is too small, you run into groupthink. You run into people, certain persons may dominate the conversation, which was something that we even had to pay attention to regarding some of the decision makers and politicians trying to sell themselves rather than actually just focus on the discussion. But that was something that we did, and we believe it worked. And occasionally you have somebody who shows up and they didn't sign up, and we weren't that kind of person where, 1 or 2 people show up, hey, you can't come in, because we were trying to be as inclusive as possible. So when we made sure
I could just pop in right there.
Go ahead.
Because I think that's important to highlight that we had, yes, we did personal invites, but because we did such a great job promoting this event and explaining the importance of the events, we had folks that just wanted to show up and be a part of that process. And like Joshua said, we did not turn those folks away. And many times, those folks added to the conversation, and gave us different perspectives that we were missing. But those happened in an organic way because we did a good job on the front end explaining the purpose of this project.
I completely agree. And even the layout was inclusive. We had people sit in a circle or a semicircle, depending on how many people showed up. So there was no front row. There was nobody in the back. Everybody was a part of the discussion, and people were sitting in circles having this discussion. There was no end or beginning point because everybody was included in that process. And layout is very important. Sometimes in town hall, you have people just sitting in the back yelling, just throwing grenades, and people in the front who are dominating the conversation. Here, we didn't have that. But a big part of that is deciding who are going to be your dialogue facilitators. And a big thing that you have to decide if you decide to go to deliberative dialogue format, are you going to have internal persons who work for the city, or are you going to have external experts or facilitators from either the greater community, or in many cases we've seen people consult and hire people outside of the community to come in and have those discussions. Now, the big factor in that is RESPECT, respect. Because if the community doesn't know and doesn't respect some of the people that are internal, they may shun those people and cut them off and not really give them the due diligence, especially if those persons have not really built a relationship with the community, and community feels as if they can trust them. In our dialogues, they were all led by staff. I think I did about half, and then we had commissioners who did some as well. And that's because we had done, prior to this dialogue, we had been consistently engaging with community, but we had a level of respect and trust from the community that we were actually going to listen to people. We weren't going to defer to politicians and the chief of police, et cetera, in these discussions. And we didn't have any outbursts really in regards to these dialogues, because there was a level of respect. Now, I have seen situations where people don't respect the persons given the dialogue or facilitating the dialogue. And in those cases, you may want to consider hiring external experts in organizations that can actually lead those discussions and really know how to facilitate conversations. Persons who have been trained to do those things with organizations like World Cafe, Kettering Foundation, such as myself, Cameron, et cetera. But you want to make sure you have that level of respect. But also you want to make sure that in the event that it is such a hot topic, that you aren't putting local employees in the crossfire and they could actually, be attacked. And I don't mean physically, but I mean just professionally, and people questioning them, et cetera, for hot button issues. So you have to think about that, is if we do this with internal folks who are trained and know how to facilitate conversation, will they get any backlash or get any crossfire from leading or being a part of these discussions that may seep into the work that they do outside of the dialogue? So you have to really consider that. And when you're having these discussions, note-taking is a very important part. We had posted boards where we wrote in big letters what ideas and thoughts people had about the various conversations. And in this case, we were talking about safety and justice. And one of the big things certain members of the decision-making class thought people were just going to solely focus on police. But actually, most people actually focused on economic and socioeconomic opportunity in regards to housing, in regards to investing in neighborhoods. And so we made sure to write all those notes, take those down. But you also needed someone in the room that was taking computer notes and taking electronic notes post-meeting, so we could come back as a team and reflect on what people said, and making sure that as we eventually try to bring this thing back to the community, that we didn't miss anything. And having both the posted board notes and the electronic notes really made sure that you weren't missing anything. Now, at the end of these conversations, each dialogue, you have to remember, deliberative dialogue is about talking and working through and understanding where people stand on issues, and also making solution-focused decisions on how we can move our community forward and how we can address this issue. So at the end of each dialogue, from the 15 to 30 persons who were in the room, we actually got them to vote on which ideas or thoughts that they like best, and they think something that we need to consider moving forward as we look to bring this information back to the community. And we gave each person, they had 3, I believe, sticky tabs, or no, it was actually much more than that. I think they were able to do 1 third place vote, 2 second place votes, and 3 first place votes. And we gave them 6 tabs, and they were able to, and they had different colors. And so each tab, they were able to put it somewhere. And some people, dumped all of them into one idea. Other people were very diverse with their ideas. And then we tallied it up right there to say, hey, this was the #1 idea for this group. So we really understood when we walked out of the room, people had an understanding of some thoughts and ideas members of the community had. They were able to bounce and talk through those ideas and why they thought this idea would really help move community forward in regards to safety and justice. And then at the end of the day, at the end of that discussion, we brought it back to, we let the community know, or those community members know, that here was the idea that won for this group. And we actually found through the number of discussions and dialogues that we did that some of them were very similar, but many of them were very different. Every group had a different dynamic. Now, when you're talking,
before you move on,
man, sorry.
Yeah, we can't overlook how much fun people had during these reveals. I mean, the energy in those rooms, I can remember back to one we did at the downtown Des Moines library. And just seeing the vast diversity of individuals that walked in that door, not only racially, but also, diversity of stations in life, people that were decision makers that were part of the process the first time when we had those initial conversations, to people that heard about the process but still wanted to find ways to be engaged. The conversations that were had at each of those stopping points to talk about not only the solution that we had on board, but also how they individually can get involved in those initiatives as well, was, to me, it was eye-opening to see, the engagement of our community, and how engaged they wanted to be a part of this process from beginning to end. But I just remember, man, talking to so many different people, man, having such high engagement level with so many of our community members. And they also got a chance to talk to some of their decision makers in those conversations. And again, going back to just organic conversations and finding these solutions, we just can't forget about the fun part of this entire process.
And I completely agree. I think some people, especially in regards to certain members of city council, they had a viewpoint of this person, but they had never engaged with this person because they're always looking at it from what's on the news or on a city council meeting where they're sitting on a bench and they're sitting in a crowd. And now you're at a meeting where you're talking with school board members and city council members and county supervisors. And you actually get to talk to this person about, why they think we should address this issue the way that they think. And also the decision makers got to ask them the same question. They were able to dialogue and mind meld and kind of understand where people were coming from. And again, one of the highest compliments I was told to take from the police department was, "Hey, this wasn't that bad." That's a compliment because they're so used to town hall format. But for the community, as you stated, Cameron, there were a number of people who were just excited that this is the first time they had been asked, and this is an important part, they had been asked, what do you think we should do about this issue? Now, many times people came in and they were just complaining. There were just so many issues and they were just complaining about all the issues. Now we're like, we know the issues exist. What do you believe we should do about it? Now, for some people, that was a tough, they never been asked how to address it. But they had been, in so long, many people are taught what to think rather than how to think. In this part, we had to walk them through the process and think through it. And that was a challenge for a lot of people, but it was a challenge we were able to overcome through this dialogue process. And you're 100% correct, Cameron. And when you're crafting and taking those ideas from those discussions, again, ultimately, our goal was to be solution focused and to utilize community input to develop policies that will move our community forward socially, economically, in the city of Des Moines. So this really kind of leads to, we talk about equity. This is the new buzzword for many communities. Everybody's talking about equity and what equity means. A very basic definition is giving each person what they need to succeed based on where they are and where they want to go. And we thought through this process, we wanted to create a more equitable process where we try to figure out where people are and develop policies to help advance their community and their neighborhood and our city forward. Now, what equity looks like is this process that we've been talking about. We're engaging the community, we're reaching out, and we did a very extensive process of both marketing and promoting and making sure we're talking about the right issue, doing a test run with the community members to make sure we're still talking about that we're on the right path and that we're moving in the right direction, that we're hitting on the points that need to be hit upon in order to actually address community concerns, but also in our marketing and making sure that we're marketing and make sure we're trying to get decision makers and business leaders and nonprofits, but also just everyday working people, including the youth. So we did an extensive engagement process. And then we decided to include them in that. But not just at the first level of the deliberative dialogues, but also bringing those things back to the community, making sure that they had a voice and a position and a platform throughout the entire process. And ultimately, when you're really trying to be equitable, you have to value the community. And that is dedicating resources and amending policies for the benefit of everyone in the community, for the benefit of the entire community. And the only way to truly understand what is equitable is to engage with people. A lot of people want to talk about equity in a closed room, but you got to open the door and understand what the problems are. And typically people that are closest to the problems are typically closer to the solutions because they understand what is going on. And you have to pass and implement equitable policy based on community need. You know, one of the mottos that we kind of had in this discussion was not for us, but with us. And there's another way to say that is, nothing for us without us. And we wanted to make sure that everybody had a hand and a voice, more importantly, in crafting what we do to move our community forward. So after those dialogues, we sat in rooms for hours at a time, posting those Post-it notes back on the wall, looking and trying to understand what were some of the common themes and common threads that came up in these discussions. And so through that, we were able to kind of craft 9 concepts of different policies and programs we could attempt to implement in the city based on that community voice. Some of those things were making sure that all government employees are culturally competent. That was 2040 ready. Another thing was, and 2040 ready came about because as an idea, because people said most of the people that work for government, especially local government, do not look like me. They don't look like my community. And we're intimidated and many times they don't speak our language. And so and they don't know how to deal and address with us. That was both police and just frontline staff of various departments. We think they need training. So that was something that we heard in a number of meetings. So we came up with the concept 2040 Ready. Another one was Ladder Up, where people were saying, we want the city to actually invest in our communities. We want to be able to move up the social economic ladder through various programs such as business incubators, grant programs, help people upskill and move up in the community and support organizations that are already doing this work. That's where Ladder Up came from. Another one was the Public Trust and Community Relations Committee, where people wanted to review the actions of first responders, making sure that they aren't violating people's rights and giving community a voice in that. Another one was the Police Department Diversified and Inclusive, creating a program from elementary school all the way through middle school, high school, and ultimately into college for persons who may be interested in being a police officer, where we don't lose them through that middle school, the dark ages of middle school, and they are able to stay engaged and stay inclusive and understand that if you go through this process, you can get a college scholarship from one of our local universities to study criminal justice. And when you get out, you'll have an internship while you're in, and when you get out, you'll be able to move through and become a police officer. And that was to make sure that we were capturing some of the young people who, when they're younger, they may want to be a police officer. As they get older, they either they don't have the grades, they get in trouble, they just want to walk away from that profession. And we wanted to keep the police department engaged with young people, and the city overall just engaged with young people throughout to make sure we're building a more inclusive community. Because as Cameron talked about, we have in our young people, the people coming up, although the city is 73% European American and white presently, but in persons under the age of 18, that group has fallen from 73% to 42%. So our future is diverse. And so we had a number of ideas, a mandatory de-escalation training, familiar faces program, where people are all city employees and especially police officers are required to do community engagement as a part of their job description. And those were a number of ideas that we had. But what we did was we actually didn't just say, these are the ideas that we're moving forward. We actually brought it right back to the community, say, are we in the right place? Did we miss anything? And we took those 9 concepts and we had reveals throughout the city. We did 4 different ones that we asked participants to vote on their top 3 that they believe we should focus on as a city. If you see, we did an art gallery style where we had those boards of the different concepts up, and we had a facilitator standing beside each one talking about what that would be. And we had different groups that we moved. It was moving through. It was actually very strategic, where they would walk through and start at one end and exit out the other. And we had groups and clusters of people who would come in, talk through those issues together and answer any questions. And then we moved that group on, and then another group would follow behind that. And we had members of our commission, as well as some nonprofit volunteer organizations who were very happy to participate in that process. And through that, they had to vote. And the vote was important because we wanted them to prioritize their top 3. Most people, and Cameron can probably testify to this as one of our facilitators, that people are, I like all these ideas. That's great, but you have to understand, as a city with limited resources and limited staffing and limited time, we can't do everything at once. So let's prioritize. And that was very hard for people. And ultimately, stable housing for stronger communities was number 1, but right behind that, very close, was Ladder Up with social economic investment. And then number 3 was cultural competency training for all city employees, which we've already actually implemented.
Yeah, Joshua, I think it was interesting that whole process of prioritizing, because as you mentioned, I think there was a lot of education that needed to be done that day. Explaining to people, hey, all of these are great ideas, clearly, right? But we can't do them all, at least not at once. And I think a lot of people were surprised when we did get to the final 3 priorities, being that the conversation started about safety and justice. Many people thought the number 1 priorities would be around policing. And I was even surprised that the number 1 priority was around housing. But when I started talking to more people at these events, what I understood was when people think about safety and justice, the first thing they think about is the roof over their head.
Yes.
And then once they have a roof over their head, they're thinking about the economic opportunities to keep that roof over their head. and keep food in their mouth. And then they walk outside and deal with the police. But there was a lot of learning both ways, not only for us as commissioners and city staff, but also for the community and understanding how things like this get prioritized, and how things actually get done and the impacts actually get made.
Very true, very true. And once we gave the community a vote in the process, and this is real democracy where everybody gets to vote on the issue. Again, we did not stop with the engagement there. We consistently engaged. We went to our city council members, had workshops about what the community wanted to prioritize and what the community wanted to focus on. Then, once the community voted, we took those ideas, again, working with city council, working with city management office, to kind of, how do we make this realistic? How do we make this a reality? And then we had, as you can see in the photo to the right, top right, Cameron and the mayor sitting and talking about, here are these ideas that we're going to implement. And even after we had made the decision to implement them, we had roundtables, as that bottom photo shows, where the community talked about, as we implement these things, what would you like to see? And giving them some additional voice. We engaged throughout the entire process. So no one could say at any time that we're doing secret meetings, that we're not being transparent, et cetera. And it held us accountable. Once we did those first delivered dialogues, people kept asking, when are we going to know the results of what our groups voted on? And doing this, people were, Cameron talked about earlier, people were excited and they wanted to know more and more. And ultimately, through this process, we've actually implemented a number of things. We've done probably about 9 items, from source of income as a protected class to police officers and city employees cannot inquire about a person's immigration status unless required by law, et cetera. Some of those things have already happened. Some of those things have come to fruition. And we're still working on a number of other things in the city. One of the things that recently worked its way through was that the grant program, where the city is giving a certain amount of grant funding from our local option sales tax dollars back into community organizations that are helping upskill and build an economic floor for community members. That's something that already happened. We started with cultural competency for employees, and now we've moved on to boards, commissions, and even elected persons. We talked about giving youth more of a voice. So we're working on restoring the Youth Advisory Board. That is happening right now as we speak. Strengthening the human rights ordinance to make sure we're protecting, adding greater protection. Source of income was a part of that, but also we're talking about, fair chance ordinances where people don't have to include on the initial application for either housing or employment, whether or not they've been convicted. They're seriously considered for a job opportunity before a background check is conducted. And developing housing. Cameron talked about how housing was the #1 option, and we wanted to develop fair housing training, require that as a part of your rental certification for landlords, still in the process. So again, through this engagement, the city not always gets great press, as we talked about some of those headlines from earlier, but the city actually got a lot of good press for some of the things that we did in the community. We actually got a rose from the city's paper for approving source of income as a protected class, which is a big part of that first initiative of stable housing, stable communities. It was unanimously supported. No one came to the meeting to protest, why were we doing this? And why was that? #1, because we did, again, engagement. Even when we were thinking about doing the ordinance, we had a community-wide meeting. We're thinking about doing this ordinance that protects people who have Section 8, Social Security, disability, VA benefit, vouchers, et cetera, from being discriminated against when trying to acquire housing. And we've had private meetings with some of the bigger housing or rental companies in the community. And once they saw the benefit of these this ordinance, they didn't oppose it. And when they didn't oppose, it was hard for the landlord association, because your bigger persons are saying we're fine with this. And that's that engagement process. And we even did something recently where we got incentives for city employees to move in the city move into the city in order to build the tax base, because we found that 63% of people that work for the city, which is about 1,700 employees overall, 63% do not live in the city. And we did a survey with them asking what the concerns were and what would be something that would make you consider moving into the city. And we found that if we gave them some sort of down payment to either get a home or either to improve the housing if they're already here, because we wanted to award the 37% that are already here, then they would be more willing to buy into the community. And what that does is that builds a stronger tax base overall. And so that recently was passed. And it was really kind of interesting. I was walking through the halls right after city council voted and the city manager approved the incentive program. And people who had never spoken to me in my entire time working for the city came up to me and came into my office. Hey, I just want to say you're doing a great job here. We really appreciate you. At first, the first person that came in was like, what was that? And then when the second person came in and talked about the housing incentives and how this is great. This is something the city should have done years ago, long before you ever got here.
Well, Josh, when you start affecting people's bottom line, they start appreciating. But
Right.
Not only does it affect their bottom line, not only does it affect the overall tax base of the city, but hear what it says in the headline. It also builds community ties, right?
Yes.
What we were hearing from community members were police officers were not living in the city. They didn't have relationships with them outside of police formal interactions. They wanted folks that served them to be in the city. And I mean, it was a win-win for both the community and for the members, for our employees of the city as well.
Right. Completely agree. It's a win-win for everybody. So we're going to conclude. Go ahead, Cameron.
Sure. So maybe we'll slide to the next slide, man. Success. Why was this so successful? I think, we've alluded to it throughout the course of this presentation, but the number one reason was high community engagement from the very beginning, in the middle of the process, at the end of the process, and continued engagement throughout. That engagement started with government leaders being willing enough to try something different. Like I said at the beginning, I think we were kind of in a perfect storm where people had no choice but to try something different because they understood they had to get something done. And by doing this Bridging the Gap initiative that was focused on solutions and not necessarily so much focused on the challenges, I think that opened people's eyes and ears to trying something different. But again, just see point two, right? Keeping our eyes and ears to the issues, right? We spoke earlier about being able to read the room and consistently reading that room, not only from that initial town hall that started all of this for me and Joshua when we vowed to each other never to go to town halls again. We read the room then, and we continue to read the room throughout this process in a way that was engaging to community members, but also teaching and educating our other influencers and political allies that their ability to read the room better would make them better at their jobs and make them more engaged with what the community's true needs were. And step three, right, community participation, letting them have a voice throughout the process. That's one thing that I really cherish about this experience that, I mean, even to this day, when I walk around our community, people still come up to us talking about, hey, when are we going to do this again? How else can we be involved in the ongoing processes that are on track and still ongoing? At the end of the day, what we did as a community was bring our neighbors together to solve the common issues that we all face. Without community meeting at a place where everybody had an opportunity to be heard, everybody had an opportunity to promote a solution, and then at the end of the day, as a community, we prioritized what was most important and what could be done immediate, but also what needed to be done at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, we just wanted to make sure that we were working together, but the work is never over. We have to consistently and continuously re-engage our community members throughout the process of Bridging the Gap 1.0, whether we come back with a 2.0 or not. This, I think, really put people on the right track of how to have these conversations, how to be respectful even through challenging times, and how do we move forward as a community for a common goals and common solutions that eventually get us to equitable policy initiatives that are going to help every single Iowan, every single Des Moines resident.
I completely agree, Cameron. But to do this, we have to avoid fear. There's a fear of trying something new and different. And one of the things that Cameron and I didn't mention was we had made the suggestion for deliberative dialogues in 2016. But we didn't get the green light until early 2018 or late 2017. We almost went through 2 years of doing town halls, et cetera, because people were comfortable with what they knew, even if it wasn't working. And they were fearful. They had this false evidence appearing real that if we do this, it's going to be chaotic because it's new and it's different. And there were just so many issues, they didn't know what to do. But the thing is, the dialogue process worked. It's continuing to work because there are continuing policies to be passed and worked upon. And regardless of all of these issues, we gotta get to work and we gotta do something different. Because the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. The future of our country and our communities is about our willingness to be able to talk with one another, and engage with one another, and working together to improve the issues that are affecting us. So that's a new way of thinking, a way that many people are, again, because it's unfamiliar, they don't want to adopt. But if we want to move forward and not back, we have to come up with a new way. But again, a lot of times when you're dealing with that long journey to change, there are people who are talking about what do I stand to lose, and they're analysis paralysis. Something we're overthinking these issues. We're doubtful. We're uncomfortable. But moving people along through the process and showing them how it worked eventually led to integration of both ideas and policies, but also bringing more people into these discussions. And a good plan or idea is only as good as those willing to invest in it and execute it. Because one of the things that we did was we consistently engaged, and we consistently gave community voice. And even now we do workshop updates with City Council that are public meetings where people can attend and see where we are on this. And so with the Bridging the Gap program that we developed, we invested in it. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of effort, and it was difficult. I think one person, one of my colleagues who when we were originally proposing, said, "Oh, this is difficult, this is hard." But the hard way is the right way. Trying to do things easy when you're dealing with different ideas and personalities, you're going to have clashes. And so people have to be able to sit down and talk through those issues. And that's how we were able to build success. And that's how we were able to help transform and implement new policies to help move our community forward. Cameron, anything you want to add before we close out?
Just want to thank ICMA for having us. At the end of the day, I think what this process taught me, it changed my idea of politics, right? I think people have a definition of politics one way or the other. My new definition, and I learned this through the Kettering Foundation, is neighbors coming together to solve common problems. And that's what we did through this process. We brought people together who'd never been brought together before to solve the issues that were facing them, whether they be influencers or those actually affected by the decisions that the influencers made. And I think it gave us an opportunity to understand that change can happen, and it can occur rather quickly when all parties are involved.
So I agree with you 100%. And again, we thank ICMA for allowing us to give this presentation. And if you have any questions, you can certainly email me and get in touch with us about ways that you can engage your community further and ways that we could possibly assist you in doing that if you deem necessary. And if you have any questions, again, this forum and this presentation will be available for a few months, and you can visit the forum via the button found within the session description and submit questions, and Cameron and myself would try to answer those questions. So we thank you for your time, and we really appreciate you listening to us and what we did to bridge the divide between our communities through deliberative dialogue. So thank you very much.